Thank you to everyone joining us this evening. We're just going to leave it 30 seconds to a minute to make sure everyone who's in the waiting room can get in, and then we'll get started. So you've got time to run and grab a quick drink if you need one. We'll be getting going in about 30 seconds. Okay, it looks like everyone who needs to be in is in. So hello and welcome to the first run of this new Meet the DTB series, where you'll have the opportunity to put your questions, thoughts and comments to current members of the Dons Trust Board as we discuss specific issues each week. The format we're going to have tonight is going to be, we're going to start with a brief presentation from our guests tonight, which are Kris Stewart and Richard Shepherd, on the topic of oversight and what that means at our club. We're then going to go to your questions. Now, we have had some in advance. These can be written in the Q&A function, or for what I believe is the first time for one of these, you're going to be able to use the raise hand function, which you should be able to do if you click on your name. But if you do that, I'll allow you to come in and you'll be able to verbally ask your question to the panelists themselves. So if you want to do that, feel free, or you can use the Q&A function. The chat should be working for everybody if you want to use it. So if you just want to chat to everyone else around, feel free to do that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kris and Richard, who will get the evening started with a quick presentation.
Hello, welcome everyone. My internet's not very good, which is a good start to this. So I'm going to turn my camera off, but hopefully you can hear me. And if not, Kris will be helping me out. So yeah, thanks for coming everyone. Like George said, we brought back Meet DTB and we want to talk and also discuss with you topics such as oversight, which is this evening club. And we do want to have a discussion, so you do want to hear your thoughts and for you to put your hand up like George said and get involved, because we want to hear from you as well. So we're going to talk about oversight, you know, what is oversight and how do we do it? And yeah, like George said, we'll invite questions at the end and any discussions. So George, could you please put up the slide? So we're going to start off with what is oversight, why do we do it, and how do we do it? So trying to make it as easy as possible. So what are we overseeing? So we are overseeing AFC Wimbledon. Who are we overseeing for? We're overseeing for our members, we're overseeing for our community, and we're overseeing for our football club. And why are we doing this? We're doing it to keep AFC Wimbledon safe for us all. We're also doing it so that AFC Wimbledon succeeds for all of us members, community, and football club. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to oversee? We're going to get the setup and structure right, and then we're going to get the right people in. So first of all, we have to understand what the setup is. So we make the rules and members have written them by us into the Dons Trust Constitution and the PLC articles. So any of the most important issues such as ownership, name, location can only be decided by you, the DT members, not just the Dons Trust Board. It has to come to you. Any other significant issues such as the budget, the club charter, going into new areas of business, all need approval from the Dons Trust Board first. And then everything else that the club deals with, they get on with it. So in terms of the structure at the club, you have the club, which have staff, volunteers, such as George, such as the retail team, Elliot, etc., and they're led by strong senior professionals. So that's Danny Macklin and Craig Cope. So Danny Macklin and Craig Cope, they report to the PLC board. So the PLC board is made up of Mick Buckley as chair, Kris Stewart, Graham Price, Michelle Little, who are Dons Trust Board representatives, You also have 2 minority shareholders, which are Ian McNay and Nick Robertson. And then there's also room to get some NEDs. So of those people on the PLC board, we need to make sure that there's a mix of skills and experience to support and challenge Danny and Craig. They also need to agree how to implement strategic direction that we as the Don's Trust board set. And then the PLC board are overseen by us, the Don's Trust board. And our role in this is to set the culture, the mission and the strategic direction with your help, with the consultation of members. And then the other thing that we do is to appoint and oversee the operational board. So how do we do this? So we, the Don's Trust board, have appointed 3 members to the PLC. That's Kris, Michelle, Kris Stewart, Michelle Little and Graham Price. And what they have to do on the board is the job of director, which is to act in the best interests of AFCW PLC. They have to keep the board aware of the rules, what it can and can't decide. So they're the rules which are restricted actions, they're the rules about name changes, the stadiums, etc., etc. They need to make sure that the board operates according to the culture, mission and strategic direction mentioned earlier, which is set by the Don's Trust board in consultation with its members. And then the last thing they do is they report back to the Don's Trust board's oversight group. The Don's Trust board oversight group contains those 3 people plus others from the board. So in our case, that's me, and I'm there and others will be there to bring a fresh perspective, guard against groupthink and challenge those 3 appointed members. And the reason we do this is because I don't have insight into how the PLC is working in as much detail, so I can ask bigger, broader questions and really challenge what's going on. Anything that's significant that comes out of that, we then tell the rest of the board about, and the full board has unrestricted visibility on the board papers, unredacted minutes. And again, that's just another fresh set of eyes to make sure that we have covered all bases, we are taking into account everything, and it's a safeguard to make sure that we are doing what's best for the members, the communities, the club, and make sure that we succeed.
So that's the theory, if you like. Hi, I'm Kris. Good evening, everyone. So that's the work that we've been doing over the last 1.5 years has been bringing that situation together, helping to bring some of those key people in as well, as you've seen, and Richard's mentioned Danny and he's mentioned Craig. Obviously we've got Mick. I almost called him Mick Hucknall then. I'm not quite sure why. I don't think he thanked me for it. Mick Buckley in the chair of the PLC board and as the AFC Wimbledon chair as well. So, but that's the setup and the structure and the rules and the formal processes, if you like. How does that work in practice? I thought we thought that it would be good to run through 3 different things, because we've got the rules that say this is reserved to members. We've got the rules that say this is something the PLC does. They need to run it past the DT board, and we've got the rules that say, get on with it, club, do your job. So looking at one of those first ones, if you like, ownership obviously is a massive issue. We are fan owned. We're owned as a club by the Don's Trust. Don's Trust owns shares with voting rights of 75% plus 1. That gives us particular strength in doing things within the PLC. We can change the name of the club if we all agree to. We can change the rules of the club, change the articles of association, and so on. And one of the things we've done over the last year and a half, for example, last December in the AGM, we asked members to support adding those rules into the PLC rules as well, the articles of association. So and we did that, and thank you to members for that. And that means that it's just quicker and more direct for us to be able to say, if we ever do need to say to the PLC board, actually, look, it's not just in the DT's rules, it's in the PLC's rules. You can't do it. Not that that situation has arisen. But that means it's protected. Any change to any of those can only happen if DT members vote to change the rules. We have, as people I hope know, we have opened up a consultation. We said we would. Last year we said we would, and this year we have done it. We're now we'll be talking to members about the level of ownership, about what level of ownership you as members think is right, whether you think that we should stick where we are and make sure that we have 75% plus one, and that ability to pass a special resolution is the technical term, change the name, change the rules, or whether you might be comfortable, maybe with some extra safeguards, who knows, to drop that between, below 75 plus one, but always staying above 51, of course, because we are fan owned and we have to remain in majority ownership, whatever happens. So we've opened up that discussion. Kevin Rye's leading that for the board, and there's going to be some sessions starting, I think, this week before that comes back to the wider membership. If that consultation concludes that a change might have strong support, and it would need strong support among members, then the board will bring a vote to members at the appropriate time. And when I say strongly support, any change that would need to be is what's called a Category A restricted action. It's an exciting concept, I know, but what it means is that at least half of the membership would need to be at least 2/3 or 3/4, I can't remember off the top of my head, in favour twice in two sets of votes within a month of each other. So it's the level of support that we needed to agree the sale of Kings Meadow. If you remember the back in 2 ticks project to get support for that a few years ago now. Clearly that was not particularly controversial. I would imagine that such the sort of change we're talking about here might be a bit more controversial, might be a bit more difficult, but as I say, if that strong support for a change is there, then the DT board would be sensible to bring a vote to members. Excuse me. Sorry. So we look at something that's next tier down, if you like, the budget for 23-24. Not just the playing budget. The playing budget is the biggest single item in there, but the whole budget for the club, in terms of staff, in terms of maintenance, in terms of the pitch and travel and everything, medical, etc. What happens there is that the staff in the club, led obviously by those senior professionals, put a budget together for all the areas in line with the strategy and what the plan is. They go back and forwards with that, with the PLC board giving support and challenge. Sure about that? Have you thought about this? Those kinds of questions. Oh, that's great, that sort of thing. And that means that the DTB members on the PLC board are part of that, making sure that we do our job as PLC board members, looking after the PLC, looking after the club, and also representing the majority shareholder, the owner, you, in effect. Once got to the end of that, there's a final budget, if you like, that gets presented to the PLC board. They met formally to endorse the budget, recommend it to the DT board. The oversight group that Richard talked about before, we then had a conversation so to look at what had come out of that, and also to be sure that the process had been robust and challenging and so on. How did we get there? Why are we happy with it? And got to the point where we were happy to recommend to the Dons Trust board that the Dons Trust board signs it off. That wasn't simply a rubber stamp either. That was a proper conversation with the Dons Trust board, again sort of checking that the right sort of challenges and checks had gone into that process, so that we could be happy that it was robust and reasonable and well supported. So the Dons Trust board then did vote to approve the budget, and that's how the budget gets approved. That's that process. Third example, bit more interesting, except that we have much less to do with it. So from a Dons Trust board perspective, it's not something we get involved in really. We did put together a policy because having been involved in lots of conversations about the possibility over the years, and about the possibility and the reality a couple of times of signing players who have plied their trade in Buckinghamshire, if you will. It's always been a bit murky and a bit unclear as to whether the Dons Trust board has a policy and is against or is it. So we thought it was sensible to get something written down, make sure that the club was clear, make sure that Craig in his new role with us is clear. We did that. We published that actually in December last year. It pretty much says we're not going to sign anyone directly from them. We don't want to sign anyone where that means that they get cash from the deal, although you wouldn't always know, to be honest. But if we do know, we'd want to avoid that. Other than that, it's up to you, Craig. It's up to you, Mick. Bear in mind that, you know, if someone's had a long, successful career there, might be hard work for us to grow to love them. So, you know, bear that in mind. And if you want to talk about any individual with people on the board, on the Dons Trust board, you're welcome to, but we're not going to make any decisions. You're going to be making those decisions. That's with you. Other than that, we stay out of it. We stay out as the Dons Trust board. Our oversight role as the Dons Trust board is carried out by the board members we appoint to the PLC board, me and Graham and Michelle at the moment, to make sure that the processes are good, that we're doing proper, you know, research into players, you know, how we go about doing that. We've got the right playbill in place, we've got coaches in place, and scouts in place. As you know, we've recently signed new scouts, and that seems to be going quite well. And we've recently this year appointed a new head of football operations. That seems to be going quite well as well. Just to make sure those processes are spot on, work exactly how we expect them to, including an expectation that you know, our recruitment team makes sure it's aware of any issues that might be not necessarily directly on the pitch. You can probably imagine conjure up your own names of players who've been involved in things off the pitch, which we wouldn't want to be involved in here. So, you know, we need to make sure, obviously, and Craig does make sure that he's aware of those things before thinking about recruiting a player. The only time really when anything in terms of player signings comes to the DT board, if you like, is if we have what we call a windfall, and in this particular instance, that would be a large, if we sold a player for a lot of money, in excess of 7.5% of our turnover. Then how that fee is used needs to be approved. Needs to be approved by the DT board. So if we got, you know, 5 million for, I shouldn't say the names of any players right now, just in case anyone takes anything from it. If in a couple of years' time we've got £5 million for a player that we've currently not heard of, then how that 5 million was spent would be something that would need a sign off from the Dons Trust board, whether that all went into the playing budget, whether some of it went to pay off debt, whether some of it went to invest in training facilities, or etc. etc. That would come to the DT board. A proposal from the PLC board would come to the DT board for approval. So that's how it works in those three instances. So I hope that we've managed to lay out reasonably for you the theory, if you like, and some of the practice. George Best in a Dons kit, that would have been great, wouldn't it? And yeah, so it would be good to understand really if that kind of thing sort of all makes sense to everybody. If anyone's got any particular questions on what Richard and I have run through there, either in terms of the principles and the setup, if you like, or in terms of the practicalities of how that works in particular situations, that would be good to know.
Thank you for that, Kris and Richard. So if you have any thoughts, comments or questions about what we've discussed this evening, please either put them in the Q&A function or put them in, or use the raise your hand function, and you'll be able to come on and verbally ask your question and have a bit more of a conversation with Kris and Richard, where we can discuss what's already been presented. Then with about 10 minutes or so left this evening, we'll open up the scope, and then it can be a bit more about any other topics or issues that you want to discuss this evening. I'll start off with the advanced questions that were sent in. The first one from Charlie Alpera. who says the PLC minutes are correctly heavily redacted and not particularly useful. The DTB has also correctly stepped back from answering operational matters. Might it be useful for the PLC to produce an annual report and an overview of the accounts for all shareholders? Nothing flashy. Perhaps the senior management team could contribute to their departments, reviewing their year highs and lows and telling us about future plans. Charlie thinks it could be an interesting, more formal approach for members to be informed about and judge the PLC. We currently seem to have an informal approach based on social media, and if we are looking to some more equity, could this be something we would have to consider anyway? Kris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think so. I've seen a few. There's a couple of examples. I can't remember where from now, but there are a couple of examples around which I've seen over the last year or so, which look quite interesting in terms of a sort of more detailed and perhaps more fan-oriented annual report from a football club. So you know, it is something that we've had a brief conversation. I mean, obviously that sits with the club and run by the PLC board, but I'm on there and I can, you know, we have sort of had those initial thought conversations about those kinds of things. One of the issues we have genuinely is that we have Exeter, yeah, that's one of them definitely, is that we have as a PLC, and also because the Dons Trust owns the club, we have a 6-month rather than a 9-month deadline for our accounts. Now, 6 months might sound like a long time, but you will have seen recently that some of the subsidiary accounts were a few days late being submitted to Companies House. And that's, you know, in particular due to some issues at the with the audit partner, etc. But actually, it's quite difficult to. We have. You may recall we've actually pushed the AGM back a couple of times in the past, again making it ridiculously close to Christmas, simply in order to get the accounts ready and signed off by audit in time. So it is difficult to see what we could do within that time frame, particularly as we do run fairly light in the club, and people are currently working very hard already. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't do something. And I'm happy to take that to the PLC board for a conversation, and I will do. I would also say actually that I think to be honest, the Dons Trust board should be reporting on itself and on the trust itself on a regular basis, on an annual basis, in a relatively formal layout format as well. And that's something that's been on the agenda, but it's not quite got to the top of the agenda, to be absolutely honest. Does that cover the question, George?
Yes, I believe it does. We'll now go. Jane Longster would like to ask a question in person, so I'll now bring Jane in. Jane, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to talk.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hi, Jane, we can hear you perfectly.
First off, thanks for doing these. I think they're really helpful in breaking down some barriers around inclusivity and having people being able to join online and stuff like that, but also about making the DTB a bit more visible and being able to say what you're doing, because there's loads and loads of good work going on. It's just not often, and you know, I completely understand quite a lot of it isn't visible because it can't be for a while, and then it needs to be, and then it always feels like you're on the back foot comms wise. So you have my sympathy with that. Just one thing I wanted to pick up with you on the presentation you've just given. There was one slide in particular that talked about the DTB members of the PLC and their role. And I was surprised that there were only 4 bullet points and that none of it mentioned being the representative of the majority shareholders, i.e. that you're there because you're a DTB member, and that's because we are the trustees, the majority shareholder. So Ian and Nick are there to represent the minority shareholders, but I'm just concerned that the majority shareholder voice is not being represented. And how do you go about ensuring that happens? How do you know what the majority shareholders think, what the Dons Trust owners think, when you're going into those meetings, and then you feed back to the operational oversight bit of your the theme groups you've set up. But how are you feeding that back to us as majority shareholders?
That sounds like more than one question, so I'll try and first of all, if it didn't make it clear, I thought it did, but maybe it didn't use the right words to make that clear. So as we all know, the first duty, the fiduciary duty of any director, is to act in the best interest of the company, and the company in the instance is AFCW plc, so that's why that's top of that list. But the rest of those, you know, what do our three members do, are all about making sure the PLC board does operates within the rules, if you like, make sure that, you know, it doesn't overstep the mark, making sure that it works within the strategic direction that the DT sets, and within the culture and mission and values that the DT set. So that's what we're doing when we're in the room, if you like. And then in terms of, sorry, does that answer that bit, or is there more to it?
Yeah, it's more about how you make sure that you know what, if you're representing the majority shareholders, how do you know what we think, and how do you then feed that back, those discussions that have happened in the PLC, noting Charlie's point about the minutes being very high level and opaque. And
sure. So the feedback to the trust board is, as I think Richard said, all the papers are available to the Trust board. Obviously the unredacted minutes are available to all the members of the Trust board, and the oversight group and the three of us who are on the PLC board, you know, report back on that basis to every Trust board meeting. So we have a standing item on the agenda for oversight, for example, as well as for strategic direction. In terms of feeding PLC board conversations back to members, that's the end part of the question, I think. Is that right?
yeah, how do we feel part of those conversations? If you know what the minutes are so opaque, you know, I don't think last year it even mentioned budget, and I can't believe that the PLC didn't have a conversation about budget.
Yeah, it did. Definitely, I was there. Yeah, so as you know, Jane, over the years, the conversation about minutes and what should and what shouldn't be in minutes has gone back and forth from every extreme, and at times boards have struggled. The Trust board has struggled to get minutes published effectively and efficiently and on time, and has published various different kinds. So at the moment, we're in the situation where we are, where we're publishing the DTB minutes as we do, and the PLC is publishing the minutes. Is obviously the issue that we had earlier in the year with a data breach has made us probably feel a bit more careful about those things than even we were previously. In terms of reflecting things back to members, though, I think that's one of the really interesting parts of this conversation, if you like, which is the Trust board is not operational and is not involved in operational decisions, and doesn't involve itself in them, and though it's aware of them. And I don't think that we have a mechanism for Trust members to involve themselves in those discussions and operational issues either. So what we have is the reporting that we do, and that's what we have.
One thing I'd like to add about representing the member side of things. So as far as everyone on the PLC board of the Trust 3, they're each representing the members in how they think is the best way. The process of having those three on the PLC board and then an oversight group and then the Trust board as a whole means that we can capture a wider view of what we think the members believe, and we have discussions and people disagree, people agree, but it's that kind of process of going, the three on the PLC will come back, this is what's happening, oversight will go, hold on a second, have you thought about this? What about that? And then the debate then can go towards the rest of the members, and each board member was obviously voted for different reasons, representing different people, and so on and so forth. So, you know, everything that we do is looking out for what's best for the club, and we do that in mind of what we also think would represent our members.
So can I come back with one point? So how do I, as a member, as a majority shareholder member, get something to the PLC? Do I do that via you, Kris, and Michelle and Graham, or do I go straight to the secretariat of the PLC, or what? If the trust isn't involving itself in operational, but you, Michelle, and Graham are covering operational, how do we square that?
Apologies, I don't use Zoom very much. I use Teams all day, every day at work. So sometimes I flick around clicking things that I shouldn't be clicking. So apologies for that. Yeah, no, the trust isn't involving itself in operational issues. So I mean that isn't just the board. The trust as a whole isn't involving itself in operational issues. So it depends what kind of thing you're trying to get to the PLC and where you are trying to do that, to be honest, Jane. So what you mean, like a proposition, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, something to do with ticketing. So something goes, thinking about my time on the board, ticketing was horrific. We had the huge nightmare of introducing SecuTick. If we were the Dons Trust, not involved in operational at that point, and we could hear every single day lots and lots of people being very upset about not being able to get tickets, how would the majority shareholders that are suffering that, and the Dons Trust members suffering that, get that point to the PLC?
If it's an issue for the club, then it needs to be raised with the club. And if the Dons Trust members think that the Dons Trust board should be putting pressure on about something, then we can do that. But the Dons Trust doesn't get involved in the operational issues. So questions for the club are questions for the club. Issues about ticketing and match days and merchandise and so on are issues for the club to deal with and communicate about.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Jane. So we'll now go on. So just a reminder to anyone who has joined us late, we're joined by Kris Stewart and Richard Shepherd. If you want to ask them a question, give them your thoughts or your comments on the main issue tonight, which is oversight, you can either put them in the Q&A area of the Zoom chat, or you can use the raise your hand function, and you'll be able to come on and ask your question in person, just like Jane just did. So we've had a couple of people using the Q&A function. So I'll start with Matt Thornett, who says, you mentioned the Dons Trust Board is there to ensure the success of the club. What does success look like for the DTB?
So in Culture Mission, we've been doing a big piece of work. We had a strategy day, and we are working on a document and updating values, vision, mission, culture, etc. And as part of that, we're going to go to the members, and we're going to, you know, have a conversation and see, you know, what does success look like. From what we've done so far, success is financially sustainable. We've seen clubs like Bury, we've seen loads of financial misfits around the EFL and the Premier League, and financial sustainability is very important. The success of the football club, obviously we want to see our team get to the highest level possible, but we have to do that within the means of financial sustainability. So we're not completely choosing one area over another. Success, you know, building up our community. You know, I think that if you looked at the area of Plough Lane 4 or 5 years ago and what it is now, it's amazing. The amount of new supporters that we're getting in, the work of the charities that we're doing is just phenomenal, and that needs to continue. So success is a lot of things. We want success on the pitch, off the pitch for the club. We want success for the community. We want success for our members. We want success for everyone. But we are doing a big piece of work on that in culture and mission, and any changes or any significant changes that we make to it, we will be bringing to the members to make sure that that is in line with your views.
But could I just add something there, if that's all right? I mean, clearly, Matt, I'm assuming you were talking about what does club success look like what does the DTB think is success for the club, rather than what's success for the DTB, which is a slightly different question, and we'd have a slightly different answer on, obviously. Just to put the hands up, if you like, there was a document shared at the 2021 AGM, which talks about championship football within 5 years, and that was part of what that board at the time thought was the right thing to set as a football goal. Clearly, A, that hasn't happened. B, we've actually gone backwards on the pitch since then, or in terms of where we are playing, and that's one reason why we need to revisit that and have a clearer, more straightforward, and clearly supported by everybody idea of what success means to us all in the short, medium, and long term, and in various parts of what we do.
John Harwood sent in a question in advance saying, why can't we as a club go share-based Dons trusting to only keep 51% shares as a minimum and sell off the 49%? He says that would raise enough money to pay off the debt and help towards the playing budget.
I'm happy to grab that one. Two parts of that answer, I suppose. At the moment, as we said in the presentation, and we've said in another number of other forums, we are undertaking a consultation with members about what levels of ownership people are comfortable with, and what combination of levels of ownership and other safeguards people are comfortable with, in terms of ensuring financial stability as well as continuing ownership control. So that's a live conversation, so by all means join in that when that comes to wider membership. Please do. The other part of it is it wouldn't raise enough money to pay off all the debt as it goes. It would be a significant contribution, absolutely. If we were to move from where we are to around about 51%, it would wipe out most of the debt. That would be an improvement. That would be an improvement of some tens of thousands, maybe a couple of 100,000, I suppose, something like that, in our interest payments every year. So it would definitely improve the financial situation looked at the moment, but it wouldn't wipe out all the debt and add much to the playing budget, just to be clear. You're on mute there, George.
Yeah, Richard, have you got anything you'd like to add on that one?
No, other than the fact that the consultation process is going to be a robust process. We've got engaged CF who are helping us to make sure that it's done to the highest possible standard. Rise, baby, so to speak. So, yeah, same as Kris, really. Going down to 50+1 wouldn't wipe out all the debts. There is no one thing that will wipe out all the debts as it currently stands. So that's why we need to have the conversation with the members to see what the best approach is to it.
Ian Hidden has sent in a question. He says, are the senior professional team on fixed contracts similar to the players? And if so, is the length of how is the length of these determined? For the record, I've been impressed by both the direction and the appointments made so far. So that's about, are people on fixed term contracts in the senior leadership team of the PLC?
So we've talked about the senior leadership team, and we've talked about that, as being a very small number of people. So anything we might say about, their personal circumstances, I think would, be very easily, traced to an individual person. So we probably won't answer that specifically. But I would say that it's unusual It would be unusual for people in those positions, as far as I'm aware, to be on fixed on contracts similar to footballers' contracts. I don't really understand how football gets away with footballers' contracts, but it does. They don't seem to me to fit very well into the world of HR and employment law, but there are specific sections of law which cover that, which I'm not an expert in. It's good to hear that you're impressed with the people and the appointments so far in the direction. That's good news. I am too.
Tom Davis has used the Q&A function to ask this. You mentioned that the Dons Trust Board's role is to ensure that the club is upholding the right culture and values. Some fans were upset by a certain player's behaviour at the end of season awards dinner, and this was addressed at the fans forum. I understand that you won't be able to get into specifics, but are you, as a board, satisfied with the club's response?
Again, I'm happy to take that. Satisfied, yes, I think that's the right word. Yeah, I mean, clearly, that was a difficult situation. Understand that the club has addressed it, and my understanding is that that's been done in a reasonable way, in the way that we'd expect, and yes, we are satisfied.
Couple of other questions that have come in. So just a reminder for everyone else, in the next sort of 5 minutes or so, we will be opening up the scope of this for people to ask questions on broader topics around the club, on other issues. Last couple of questions before we move into that. You can start asking those questions now in the Q&A, or start raising your hands and we'll get on to you in a couple of minutes. So the couple of questions on the oversight. In relation to setting the budget, does the Dons Trust Board, when consider signing it off, consider the numbers themselves, i.e. is it a realistic budget, or does it just consider the process that has led to that budget being set?
Good question. Bit of both, but the Dons Trust Board isn't expert in football club finances in that sense, in the marketing and sales that goes into those. So while some of us do have experience of that, and we would and do challenge on the PLC board anything that we think looks out of line. I think it's it isn't really the Dons Trust Board's role, in as much as we don't make sure that expertise is there. Obviously, individual Dons Trust Board members do have their own expertise and can some Dons Trust Board members are involved in particular parts of, for example, the match day operations, or volunteers or whatever. So there is insight there, if you like. But in terms of expertise, it's a challenge that's mostly based on process.
Another question. Sorry, Richard, go ahead.
That's that, George. So fortunately for us, or depends how you look at it, we do have 3 accountants on the PLC board who are used to looking at budgets. So they are able to looking at budgets at a high level as well. So they are able to look at a budget and go, hold on, this looks quite out of place. In terms of playing budget versus non-playing budget, that's for Danny and Craig to battle it out with the PLC to decide what the focus is. But that is then in line with the direction that we've set the PLC. One other thing that I think is important to mention is that with the PLC board, we want to have the right mix of skills and expertise. And one thing that we've recently introduced is a nominations committee. So this is pretty standard for most companies, and it's in line with UK corporate governance law, which I know is another very, very exciting topic. Essentially, the nominations committee are there to try and identify any skills gaps on the board and try to get in people who can help the PLC run more efficiently and get expertise and get extra perspective on top of what we already have. That's something that we're currently doing, and that's something else we've done to help improve the oversight of the club.
Thank you, Richard. Another question we have, again on the presentation, was talking about the player recruitment side. It says, in relation to player signings, have the PLC or Craig Code been given any guidelines on player recruitment beyond their playing record So as what do we expect from players, or what is and isn't allowed, or what could cause a problem? Have we given the club any guidelines?
I think part of short answers, no, the Dons Trust Board hasn't given Craig guidelines, but let me tell you a bit more than that. So part of getting someone, you know, like Craig into that position, the head of football operations position, and also getting the, you know, the sort of knowledge of football that as a business that Danny brings, you know, from his experience, and also the football advisors that we've had, you know, experienced football advisors that we had for the PLC board. Part of that is to make sure that we are building the right culture throughout the football club from bottom to top. Not to take apart anything that's happened in the past, but simply to say, you know, that the whole club from top to bottom, that's actually football and non-football, you know, should be a welcoming culture that is nurturing and helps people to grow and make the best of themselves, in whether they're, you know, a finance assistant or a goalkeeper, throughout the entire operation. So, and that's been part of the reason for getting Craig into his role. The reason for having that role is to make sure that we've got you know, a thread running through everything we do. For example, on player recruitment, where, you know, it isn't just counting the number of times that someone has, you know, made the crucial cross or whatever the statos call it these days. But that I think Craig said a few times he wants to build a side for us that feels like a Wimbledon side, and that's really important from top to bottom.
Thank you, Chris. So we'll open up the floor now to anyone who has any questions, comments, or thoughts on other issues around the club. So if you want to have it come on and discuss something, or use the Q&A function for that, feel free. We've got about 10 minutes or so left on the show today. We still have some questions to go through as well. So Chris, the next question we have is something that's come through almost as a follow-up to an answer to something Jane said. When there is an issue regarding a club PLC decision that the membership disagrees with, how do we ensure the Dons Trust Board is agile enough to respond should it wish?
So I think that you know, clearly there's an elephant over there in the corner, in the room. But let's talk about next time. Let's talk about the future. So what's really important to me, and this is, you know, me speaking personally from the you know, year and a half that I've been on the board, is that it's very important to us and to the future of our club that we build a really strong, excellent set of people who, on and off the pitch, football and operations and business operations, who we believe in, who we trust, who we want to grow, who believe in us as a football club, believe in AFC Wimbledon, and trust us as well. And part of that is making sure that people are empowered to get on with their jobs, and that when things are challenging, that we can offer support where it's wanted and where it's needed, and that's primarily by supporting the PLC board in its job. So when there's something that a number of Dons Trust members aren't happy with that happens, and there will be, there's bound to be, because, you know, opinions, we all care. So, you know, the reason we're here is because we care really passionately about our football club. We have strong opinions about some parts of that football club and how it should be and how it shouldn't be, whether that's pricing or how merchandise works or what happens on a match day or who should be on the pitch or, you know, how players should behave, all of those things. We've all got really strong opinions about those. You haven't elected me and Richard to manage those. You've elected me and Richard to put the right people in place to manage those. And if those people aren't doing the job right, then we need to do something about that. Of course we do, you know, whether, you know, whatever kind of support that is, whatever kind of help that is, and whatever kind of, you know, additional things that might be. But we're not here to say that's wrong, do it differently, unless it's existential. You know, so if it's something existential, something that threatens our existence, then we need to intervene. Otherwise, we're not going to intervene, because that's the wrong thing to do. So we do need to feed back to the PLC board, where, you know, a significant number of members have raised an issue with us about something that's happening or something that's happened. We need to make sure that we do that, but we need to make sure we do that within the context of making sure that we enable people and empower people to get on with their jobs.
Richard, do you have anything to add on that? I will take that as a no.
No.
Okay. So this is the last question that I've been sent here. So it's your last opportunity to anyone in the chat to ask a function in the Q&A, or to raise your hand and come on and ask a question in person. But the last question I've been sent here is, what safeguards are in place should the Dons Trust Board decide they wish to intervene in a decision made by a PLC? Made by the PLC. I know it's similar to what we just had. But how do the Dons Trust actually, the process that leads to a Dons Trust getting involved in that decision, if, let's say, it's not viewed by the, not agreed with by potentially those board members that are on the PLC?
So we have a straightforward provision in the on you know, within the which members added supported us in adding to the PLC's rules at the AGM last December, which says that if the three Dons Trust board members are agreed on the PLC board and there's a vote, that they won't be outvoted, if you like. So that's the genuinely, I think it's unlikely that that will happen, because the PLC board knows what it can and can't do, and knows that you know, those three, the three of us are representatives of the majority shareholder. In the end, the majority shareholder can, you know, 75% plus one shareholder can do what it likes. We could, if we decided it was important enough, we could, you know, sack the entire PLC board and reconstitute it. I mean, that would be a disaster. We'd be in a disaster situation if anyone thought that that was what we needed to do. But obviously, you know, everyone, we know that that's the situation. So the majority shareholder is ultimately in charge. What we've done is we've said this is how we're going to work things. So, but yeah, very clearly, there's that mechanism which says, you know, if there's something that the PLC board is discussing, and, you know, some members of the PLC board want to do, if the three DTB members of the PLC board don't want it to happen, then it won't happen. So that's the simplest part of it.
And I guess to add to that, from someone who's not on the PLC board, but job is still to oversee, that's where you have conversations first. So Kris, Michelle and Graham will have conversations with the PLC and have those cover about any issues such as that.
Sorry, Richard, I don't think we can hear you.
Okay, I'll start again. So as someone who's not on the PLC, the way that oversight works in terms of coming back to the rest of the board, if Graham, Michelle and Kris don't necessarily agree. So Graham, Michelle and Kris will obviously have conversations with the PLC board about certain topics. They might agree, they might disagree, but everything in those conversations, especially at board level, will be in minutes, and there'll be documents, and I can read through those documents and minutes, and so can the rest of the board. And if we think that, hold on a second, that's not right, then the rest of the Dons Trust board can say to Kris, Michelle and Graham that we don't think that's right. Let's have a wider conversation, and then we can go from there. So it's part of that just protection. So the way that I see it is a lot of the footballing issues the PLC are there to deal with, and if anything manages to sneak through that gate, then the Dons Trust board are there to prevent it from going any further. So most of the issues are battered away between the three on the PLC, so Kris, Michelle and Graham, and the rest of the PLC. But anything that does leak through, that's for me and oversight and the rest of the board to deal with if need be.
We've had a couple of questions come through on the Q&A, so we'll ask them now. Matt Thornett again says the members elect the DTB. Is there a reason the members don't get to vote on specifically who should be the chairperson and who should be the Dons Trust Board representatives on the PLC board?
There's a number of reasons. I mean, the simplest and most unhelpful reason, I guess, is that because that's the way we've set things up over all the time that we've been going. Actually, I think there are some, if you like, some technicalities which would make that quite difficult, but I don't think those are the most important things. And if someone, if members generally thought that was the best way of doing things, then I'm sure we would find a way of getting over the technicalities, although some of them would be quite tricky. I think that these sorts of questions come up in lots of organisations like ours. It would be, there are all sorts of, thoughts of, in favour and against. And if anybody thought that was a change like that would be a good thing to do, then it would be something that would be worth, talking about in an SGM sometime with members. Very quickly, in favour, I think, Matt, you kind of, it's kind of obvious, members might have a particular personality, style, set of views, whatever in mind that they would like to be leading the Dons Trust board, or would like to be representing the Dons Trust board in the PLC. The other side of that is that it is already difficult to ensure that you get a well-balanced board from elections, if you like, because people vote for whoever they want to vote for, and that's absolutely right, and that has to continue. But it does mean that you come to a board after the election, and then you try and work out how are we going to do X or how are we going to do Y, because people aren't there, and we're now going through a process of trying to co-opt some people to balance that out a little. And direct elections through individual positions would be, I guess, even more vulnerable to that. But it's it's something that organisations like ours often discuss at times and often change their minds about. And if members felt particularly strongly, that would be something to discuss at a general meeting.
Gary Davis says, does the role of volunteering still have an important role to play at the club?
Yes.
Yes, we've got.
Sorry, Richard, go on.
No, so part of the culture piece that I'm doing is to kind of include volunteers as part of the word family. So the club is the community, the staff, the players, the Dons Trust members, the fans, but also including volunteers in that, because we wouldn't have got to where we are without the volunteers. And things are different now than they were at Kings Meadow. That's the case, and it's a fact. But Craig Cope was very, very impressed with the work of the volunteers at the training ground, and I don't think he realised how good our volunteers actually are. So there's plenty of things to do, and volunteers are amazing. I mean, we ourselves are volunteers, and we want to make sure that people appreciate the fact that all the hard work the volunteers do.
Absolutely, massively. Part of our club, part of our culture, part of our DNA, massively important to us. As Richard said, Clough Lane is very different from Kings Meadow in lots of ways, and there's been a lot of getting used to doing things quite dramatically and radically different. With the sort of hiatus of COVID in between as well, which obviously didn't help. But yeah, I think one of the things that I was fantastic over just after the end of the season was that those volunteers helping out at the training ground and actually being part of that Omar's player reveal, which was he really enjoyed as well. Having spoken to him about it, he really enjoyed that as well. And he said he did say that he picked up a paintbrush himself, although I didn't see any video evidence of that having happened. So I don't know whether he was having me on there. I see James suggested that there is something in the Constitution about the board electing a chair. So you know, if that were to be done differently, it would require a constitutional change. Yeah.
So I think that brings an end to our session this evening, and bang on time as well. We have done exactly an hour. So thank you to everyone who's been sending in questions. Thank you to Jane, who came on and asked a question in person. Thank you to those of you who sent your questions in advance. Thank you to Kris and Richard for joining us this evening and making themselves available for these questions and comments. This has been recorded tonight, so we will be uploading it. It will be made available via a link on ProBoards probably sometime tomorrow. For anyone who might have missed a bit of this session, or anyone who any members who haven't caught any of it, we will be back doing another one of these next month. The date is still to be finalised, but it'll probably be towards the end of August, and that'll be with Michelle and Kris. And the topic of that is going to be, what is the Dons Trust doing? What is the Dons Trust Board doing about equality and diversity? So that'll be the next one of these on equality and diversity, and that'll be towards the end of August. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully we'll see you then. And thank you. Have a good evening and enjoy pre-season.
And thank
you, George, as well. Yes. And also we won a game in a friendly, so all looking positive. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.